Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. What the idea of the panel was today was to provide some firsthand opinions from our panelists in the area of why compliance is not enough, why you need to expand your scope. And I think French Caldwell did a fantastic job of talking about the importance of moving beyond just compliance itself. So I want to go ahead and we'll introduce the panelists and then we'll set the tone for the discussion. I'll start by throwing out some questions to the panelists. We want to make this interactive, and then we'll have some audience participation where you'll have an opportunity to ask the panelists some specific questions in this area. So I'll ask the panelists to go ahead and introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their background to start with. So, Marcelo?
Bom dia a todos. Como foi introduzido, eu sou advogado de origem, né? Atuo ainda como advogado, mas paralelamente eu construí um caminho envolvendo inicialmente governança corporativa. Eu coordeno o Centro de Governança Corporativa da FIPECAF, que é uma fundação da USP. Eu comecei a me envolver primeiro com o tema ética, onde eu coordeno até hoje 2 comitês de ética, né? Um na Câmara Britânica e na Câmara Alemã. E também, com o desenvolvimento do tema governança, eu acabei percebendo que não bastava uma empresa ter como princípios e valores os valores da governança e da ética se ela não tivesse isso transformado em prática. Aí o tema compliance veio à tona há mais ou menos uns 3 anos, um tema realmente muito novo no Brasil, e onde eu comecei a me envolver com alguns compliance officers na organização de uma entidade voltada a discutir compliance, e recentemente a gente publicou então um livro no tema compliance. Isso mostra um pouco o percurso desses temas no Brasil, e aí fazendo uma ligação com o IT também, né? Quando eu, há 4 anos atrás, coordenei o primeiro curso de MBA em governança no Brasil, foi muito emblemática a primeira aula. Eu pedi para as pessoas se apresentarem, e uma pessoa se apresentou, ouviu, eu apresentei o primeiro curso, né, qual era o objetivo do curso, muito mais focado em governança corporativa. Aí uma pessoa falou assim: olha, eu gostaria de me apresentar, mas eu não sei o que eu estou fazendo aqui, na verdade. Eu falei: por quê? Então, eu trabalho na rede canária de IT. E eu sou responsável pela área de governança de IT. E alguém falou para mim: olha, você tem que fazer um curso de governança de IT, porque você está nesse tema. Ela procurou, encontrou lá um primeiro MBA de governança e se inscreveu. Chegou lá, ela viu que era governança corporativa. Depois que ela ouviu a primeira aula, ela disse: olha, eu achei que não tinha muita relação com o tema, mas eu acho que eu vou continuar fazendo o curso. Já que eu estou inscrito, a empresa está me pagando, então eu vou continuar, eu vou sentindo se faz sentido ou não, depois eu abandono. Depois da terceira aula, ela percebeu: olha, tem tudo a ver com governança de IT, o tema governança corporativa. Eu acho que isso pode ser um grande diferencial, inclusive para a minha atuação. A empresa está abrindo capital. Daí eu percebi um pouco, essa primeira palestra de manhã foi bem ilustrativa nesse ponto. Eu acho que a Módulo aí está exercendo um papel fundamental nisso, que é unir esses 2 mundos, o mundo do IT com o mundo da governança, né? Mostrando que há sim uma grande relação entre os temas, né? Hoje, não por acaso, os 2 temas têm governança em comum. Existe aí um conceito de governança que está acima até de governança de IT, governança corporativa. Eu acho que o desafio, acho que até do painel hoje, de manhã, é realmente como aproximar esses 2 mundos. Isso eu acho que é a minha abordagem aqui, tentar de alguma forma mostrar como é que se aproxima o mundo da governança corporativa, do compliance, com o mundo da governança do TI.
Yes, thank you. Bom dia. I'm Scott Crawford. I manage the security and risk management practice for Enterprise Management Associates, which is an IT industry analyst firm based in Colorado, in Denver, in the United States. I'm a former Chief Information Security Officer. I was the CISO for an organization related to the United Nations. I was the CISO for the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization. And we had a rather unique governance requirement. Ours was a policy enforcement organization. We were responsible for monitoring the global environment for compliance with the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. which meant that as a security officer, I was responsible for working with policymakers of 155 nations and working with them to develop consensus on policy guidelines and policy activities. And working that conversation the other direction, I was also responsible for informing this organization as to what the impact of their policy intentions and policy decisions would be in terms of technology and technology risk and security risk in particular. So our organization had a very unique mandate to monitor the global environment. We had a mandate to assure that that information was reliable and credible. So we had responsibility for assuring the integrity of that information, protecting that information against attack and some very sophisticated attacks. So in my organization, the relationship between IT security and policy definition, policy enforcement was very clear-cut. This is one of the reasons I went into becoming an industry analyst, in part because of that, but also because we saw that our approach to IT management and organizational management had a very important impact and a very positive impact on the management of risk in technology. And I saw that a lot of organizations did not have that same level of maturity. So in my research, I focused on the things in terms of managing risk in IT that benefits the business and also has a positive impact on managing security risks as well. And some things that really quite basic, and a lot of organizations continue to fail at. I mean, very simple things in a lot of cases, and we see evidence for this in things like data breach reports, the Verizon data breach investigation reports, and so on. Things like configuration and change management, how they support IT that's more responsive to the business, helping the business achieve its primary objectives. Identity and access controls, which French spoke about a little bit earlier. So and we see how these relate directly to failures in IT security, but how when they're done well, they do help the business perform better and help IT help the business to perform better as well too. So this is sort of the theme of my focus on GRC and GRC research, how these things are related, and how compliance may or may not help that depending on the organization's approach to compliance.
Bonjour, my name is Stephen Jones. Thank you so much for having us today. This is so far it's been a wonderful conference. French did a good job this morning. My name is Stephen Jones. I'm with a bank in Southeast U.S., Georgia. The name of the bank is Synovus. Synovus is an interesting banking structure. It's recently changed, but we had as many as 30 banks at one time, or even more before that, where each bank was separately chartered. So we had some unique challenges. My background is in IT, information risk, and we've recently reorganized our organization around risk management under a chief risk officer. Where we've seen benefits and values in things that we've done in IT risk management, and we've seen a lot of those methodologies and approaches and understanding of the business translate into operational risk. So we've seen a transformation there, and many of the points that French brought out this morning around the value of operational risk and the value of IT risk, and bringing those worlds together. Compliance has always been, at Synovus, a challenge because of the organizational structure with 30 separately chartered banks. We had most of the regulatory bodies in the United States did look over our activities. We had state chartered banks, we had nationally chartered banks. So it led to a lot of compliance activity. And so we quickly saw the value of GRC, governance, and risk and compliance, and getting through the compliance into risk management and into the performance area. So we see a lot of value in control rationalization. We see a lot of value in making the business understand risk and understanding the business at the same time, and bridging that gap and breaking down the silos within areas of risk management within the organization. So that's one of my key messages here today. But thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. So we'll have a great panel to talk about from a practitioner standpoint of view and from an analyst point of view of how do you bring these things together, why do you do it. So let me start out this way. So you heard French Caldwell talk about the inflection point of business, where compliance achieves one part of the puzzle, but there's other parts of the puzzle because of the business objectives. You have brand reputation, financial risk, you have to comply with regulations, you have to reduce risk, and then you have to do it in the light of change of everything. Change of processes, change of people, change of regulations, everything's continually changing, and there's a lot of commonalities between the two. Is how do you manage them in a consistent way together, and how do you justify it to the stakeholders and management of the company? So we'll start out with our first question is, with all this complexity and the requirements to manage regulations, manage risk, manage best practices, why do you think that people are still focusing in using manual methods and paper methods as opposed to looking to more automated solutions? Marcelo?
Essa pergunta é bem interessante e ela toca diretamente uma situação que eu passei recentemente. Eu participo de alguns projetos de consultoria na área de governança e eu fui chamado por uma empresa na área de saneamento que em cada planta que ela opera, né, esgoto ou água, ela abre uma companhia específica, né, uma SPE. Daí eles perguntaram, olha, nós temos já mais de 13 empresas, né, nós temos queremos abrir capital nos próximos anos, vamos ter muito aporte de recursos, saneamento no Brasil, uma área que precisa crescer muito, e a tendência é que a gente tem aí, sei lá, 100 empresas. Como é que a gente vai administrar, né, a governança dessas empresas? Saber se cada uma dessas empresas está realizando a assembleia como está previsto no estatuto, se tem ata, se quem assinou os documentos tinha poderes para assinar os documentos. Eles me chamaram e falaram assim, olha, nesse primeiro momento a gente não quer mudar as regras de governança, nós queremos simplesmente ter uma ferramenta para que todas essas regras de governança que já estão previstas nessas 13 empresas efetivamente sejam cumpridas. Né? Eu fui lá e chamamos um especialista em governança, que pensamos que é você, para nos ajudar. Eu falei, tá bom. Eu comecei a estudar os documentos secretários da empresa e tentar fazer um Excel. Né? Mas, realmente, né, eu percebi exatamente isso, que sem uma solução integrada de IT, o mundo da governança pode ter todas as regras mais perfeitas do mundo definidas. Se você não tem depois como, de forma integrada, fazer a gestão de tudo isso, fica uma coisa sem sentido. Então, qualquer projeto de governança precisa do envolvimento da área de IT. Às vezes o projeto começa na área de IT, ele tem que chamar o pessoal da governança ou do legal, né, da área legal, ou vice-versa. O que eu sempre recomendo é, quando um projeto começar, tentar fazer um comitê para integrar todas as partes. Né? É difícil hoje, na organização, você ter essas caixinhas. Você tem que chamar no início de um projeto um comitê, envolvendo a parte legal, a parte de IT. O legal ainda no compliance é o mais forte. Isso não é porque eu sou advogado e quero defender a classe, não, mas quem conhece um pouco do Brasil sabe o número de regulações legais que existem. Para qualquer tema existe uma lei, né? E hoje, se a empresa conseguir ter um sistema para cumprir toda a legislação, ela já está fazendo aí 95% do seu compliance, né? O resto são 5%, talvez um pouco em outros temas. Mas a regulação no Brasil é muito forte. E aí, para fechar um pouco aqui, eu acho que o que falta no Brasil é ter os administradores das companhias, eles não têm consciência do risco que eles estão assumindo ao não ter um sistema integrado de gestão de riscos, de compliance, necessariamente com uma solução de IT. Né? Por quê? Porque o administrador no Brasil, quando eu falo administrador, não é simplesmente o board, né, os gestores e administradores, mas também o board of directors, os membros do conselho de administração, ambos são administradores no Brasil. Eles respondem pela legislação brasileira, no caso de violação à lei, né, de no compliance, eles respondem pessoalmente com o seu patrimônio próprio. E é muito comum, até no meu escritório, receber ligação de administrador falando, olha, não sei o que aconteceu, mas minha conta pessoal está bloqueada por causa de uma dívida de uma ex-empresa que eu fui administrador, uma dívida trabalhista, e assim por diante. Ou seja, no Brasil, o administrador, como em outros países, e isso é um pouco a tendência também pela governança corporativa que defende a responsabilidade, né, o accountability dos administradores. Então, existe daqui para frente uma tendência muito grande de envolver os administradores cada vez mais em processos por não compliance. Recentemente eu soube de um caso de uma empresa que está envolvida num projeto de governança que um dos seus business partners do interior do Maranhão teve envolvido num problema de fraude, sem nenhum envolvimento direto de nenhum funcionário da empresa, e um promotor do interior do Maranhão queria decretar a prisão do presidente da empresa no Brasil, né, de uma multinacional no estrangeiro. Ficou totalmente a situação um dos piores momentos da história da empresa em termos de situação de risco, porque, ou seja, existe pelo desenvolvimento da e-governance, né, um pouco que foi falado na primeira palestra, a rede social de controle, cada vez mais uma tendência de controle social, né, difuso das organizações. Esse controle difuso de organizações vai levar, com certeza, uma ação mais forte, no Brasil, especialmente do Ministério Público. Então, é fundamental para o administrador, no seu dever legal de diligência, o administrador tem um dever de ser diligente, ter uma solução efetiva de gestão de riscos e compliance, para caso a empresa esteja envolvida em algum problema, e a gente sabe que quem especializa em fraude, eles sabem que qualquer empresa está sujeita a fraude. Uma empresa que tem um bom sistema de fraude, o índice de fraude é menor, mas sempre vai existir fraude, afinal, a fraude faz parte, infelizmente, da natureza humana, e a empresa é feita de pessoas. Então é fundamental que o administrador seja consciente da sua responsabilidade pessoal, inclusive, né, e que seja diligente nesse tema, buscando soluções aí envolvendo a área de IT, soluções que façam a gestão do risco, para saber aonde o risco é maior, para fazer uma ação mais forte. Afinal, como as regulações são muitas, né, é difícil, se você não tiver uma gestão de risco para saber onde o risco é maior, dificilmente você vai ter como estabelecer prioridades, e onde você sabe que tem que investir efetivamente recursos.
I get a little concerned that as practicing professionals, we get lost in our own world. And what you're talking about, Jeff, is a symptom, in my view, of what's a larger problem, is that risk management is so reactive, it's behind. It's not ahead of the business, because what is the business after? The business is after success. They want to make money, they want to grow, they want to broaden their markets. These are the things that are most important to senior executives, to shareholders, to people working for an organization. That's the thing that's most important. Where does risk come in? A business doesn't pursue an opportunity so it can stay safe. Do any of your businesses say, I want to do something so we can be safer as a company, so we don't have any problems, so we don't encounter anything that makes us sweat, if you will? No one succeeds at doing that. So the sensitivity of the business is to seize opportunity, to capitalize on opportunity. And risk management too often comes behind that. So one of the things in my role as a practitioner was to make our organization aware of where they were taking on risk and taking on opportunity. One of the biggest challenges is getting the organization to be sensitive to that, to be aware that this is an issue. We see this today in terms of the development of web applications, where there is risk and vulnerability in those applications, and then getting the business to recognize we have to fold in security in the development of these applications. They see cost. They see the added cost of developing applications, and they may not care about it until they have an incident. One of the things that's really characterized risk management over time is the fact that incidents drive what we respond to. So regulation is behind incidents. It responds to incidents, and it may or may not have anything to do with what's real today, which is to the point of this discussion here. What does compliance mean security? If it's behind, one of the things that characterizes compliance is that it can be behind, and often is, what's really happening today. So Sarbanes-Oxley in the United States was behind what happened with the collapse of the economy in the late 90s. Today, we see things like Basel II being ahead of what happened in the consumer credit and mortgage markets. But did it prevent it from happening? No, because of the sensitivity of the business to risk. So what you're talking about, Jeff, in terms of manual processes rather than an automated approach, is that too many businesses are behind and reacting rather than being proactive and responsive and taking an approach to risk that tries to anticipate what can we do safely and still achieve our business objectives, still be profitable, still succeed. I'm sure you see that in banking after the last few years.
Absolutely, Scott. I agree with what you're saying. I think, you know, that part of it is the pace of change in regulations and also the solid nature of regulations. We heard from Bob the other day around PCI and obviously the banking regulations, and you've got even HIPAA affects us in certain ways. So, and Sarbanes-Oxley in the United States, a lot of these are reactive, but they're also the pace and the expectations are increasing. And that's contributing to this, you know, this problem that we're seeing around manual controls and around isolated controls. I was talking to Alvarez Lima from Modula last night. We were joking that a lot of these GRC, the competitor really is Excel, Microsoft Excel, because what all of these you know, parts of the organization are doing are managing their risk and controls through Excel spreadsheets. So that you know, that's part of it, but also I think breaking down the silos between these areas of risk management within the organization, we can start to see some value. And I think as you go up the maturity curve from compliance into risk management into performance, you know, that's when you can start realizing some of the values of risk management and demonstrating the risk management value back to the business. Because, you know, to Scott's point, you know, we're in the business of making money. We're not in the business of selling, of buying insurance or managing risk. But at the same time, we are, because so much of these areas of financial industry, you know, for example, other areas are in risk management. That's a fundamental component to their business. So risk is inherent to the business, but how we manage that risk and the effectiveness in which we do that is paramount.
Thank you. So you talked about automating some of the processes and standardizing on ways to do that. How do you suggest that a company goes, how should they approach it, and how should they become more mature in that process?
In terms of approaching risk management, you know, it's really about people, process, and technology. I mean, we hear about governance. Governance, you know, French mentioned it this morning, is not a software package. You know, so much about our evolution and maturity is about establishing relationships within the organization across, you know, reaching across the aisle and understanding what the business is all about and understanding that business process. Without understanding the business process, you can't manage risk. You can't manage what you don't understand. So that is number one. Number two, you really have to have that coming from the top. Executive ownership and executive accountability, board level ownership, board accountability. I think, you know, SOX in the United States has created some of that with audit committees. Companies are looking at dedicated risk committees, but that has to come from the top. And setting the organization's appetite for risk is critical to that. So, you know, there are a lot of things you can do around accountability. The culture often plays a big influencing role in terms of how, you know, where you need to put your focus, whether it's, you know, areas of the organization or just general accountability throughout the organization. I think, you know, we in IT have worked through that for years, but expanding that out into the business brings about a whole new set of challenges. So those are some of the things that we look for in terms of a comprehensive program, because governance and process and technology all need to work together towards a comprehensive solution.
In terms of the tools that you're asking about, Jeff, and the fact that you mentioned, it's very true, by the way, that one of the biggest competitors to a GRC platform is just the spreadsheet. And I think one of the things that helps organizations recognize the value of these tools is doing the same thing over and over again and having to redo it from the beginning every time. And so as risk managers, one of the things that we can bring to the attention of the business is, do you realize how much this costs to do this over and over again with a spreadsheet, to try and have someone manually learn what all the requirements are for compliance in a certain area, when they change, how that affects what we do, and to keep doing that in a spreadsheet over and over again. So one of the things that a platform can help the business do is improve its efficiency. I mean, one of the big advantages of management systems generally is to improve efficiency and reduce these repeated processes, and to help them find out where they can, as we put it at EMA, implement once and comply with many. Do it once, comply with a lot. And when things change, they can see how, do we need to change anything in what we're doing? So when a platform can correlate and rationalize these control objectives across multiple requirements, the business can see if it needs to do anything particularly different. And again, getting back to our original topic here, is compliance, does compliance mean security necessarily? Bob Russo talked about this yesterday. Practicing good security should result in compliance. And so when regulation changes, when requirements change, if you're practicing good security, you may be able to identify where, if the regulation changes, you may already have it covered. You may be able to comply without having to change a lot of what you're doing. This, again, another area where practicing good security will help compliance in more than one area, and where a GRC platform can help you identify those kinds of things.
Essa questão é muito importante. Eu tenho sempre procurado ressaltar que governança e compliance não é simplesmente evitar sanções legais ou regulatórias. O lado mais importante é exatamente buscar com que a empresa, na verdade, quando se fala em ética empresarial, você tem um lado da ética, que é integridade, não violar leis ou normas éticas socioambientais, mas o lado mais importante da ética empresarial são quais os objetivos e princípios que uma empresa deve seguir, não apenas princípios morais, mas princípios de negócio, né? Qual é a missão, quais são os valores da empresa, né? E o programa, a governança, o programa de compliance, se eles forem vistos nessa perspectiva de ajudar a empresa a buscar os seus objetivos, os seus princípios, e não apenas evitar com que ela se envolva em violações legais, vai se agregar mais valor ainda ao tema governança e compliance, né? Então, a empresa deve, para ela ser eficiente, ela deve buscar atingir os princípios a que ela se propõe de negócio da seguinte. Então, cada empresa tem a sua missão, valores, e esse é o papel também do compliance, não apenas evitar violações, mas fazer com que a empresa seja mais eficiente na busca dos seus princípios. O que a gente percebe quando uma empresa também implanta um programa de compliance, e tem um efeito importante, que as pessoas da empresa começam a pensar no que ela está fazendo. Porque a partir do momento que você tem regras de compliance, as pessoas não podem mais fazer coisas de forma automática, como costumavam fazer, sob pena de incorrer alguma violação legal. Então as pessoas começam a pensar um pouco mais em como agir, isso leva também à eficiência, né? Então, no momento que você cria na empresa uma cultura das pessoas pensarem no que estão fazendo, se estão fazendo a coisa da forma correta, ajuda também a empresa a pensar, as pessoas a fazerem as coisas da forma mais eficiente possível. E, conversando com alguns compliance officers, eles sempre, a grande discussão sempre é essa: olha, como mostrar para a alta administração que vale a pena investir em compliance, né? Eu sempre falo, olha, um dos lados é o lado do risco, efetivamente, que o administrador tem pessoalmente, né, por um ato de não compliance, o seu patrimônio pessoal. Então, tentar convencer pelo medo, né, de não ser ele pessoalmente, ou a sua reputação pessoal de executivo não está envolvida, mas para a empresa também tem muito a ganhar, não só em evitando sanções e multas cada vez maiores. Tivemos casos recentes aí, a própria SEC, multas milionárias, né, impostas a empresas que estiverem envolvidas em algum tipo de fraude, algum tipo de problema, mas também, como eu falei, uma empresa que está de acordo com normas, ela é efetivamente mais eficiente. Como eu falei, não sei se alguém da área de compliance que implantou aqui um programa de compliance, efetivamente a empresa acaba economizando muitos custos com um programa de compliance. Um exemplo que uma vez deu, eu sempre gosto de citar esse caso, que eu acho que é emblemático, o caso da Siemens, né, que ela teve um grande problema no passado, e uma condenação enorme na SEC, resolveu aí investir bastante, os alemães quando resolvem fazer um negócio, faz quem fez, resolveu investir bastante na área de compliance. Eles têm um programa no Brasil que a gente vai interesse em trocar, conhecer um pouco na prática. O programa da Siemens, eu acho que é um dos mais avançados no Brasil na área de compliance. E o Wagner, que é o compliance officer da Siemens, falou, olha, uma coisa simples, quando eu comecei a ter uma norma interna, a aprovação de almoço, por exemplo, né, começou a perceber que começou a cair muito o custo com o almoço, da área de vendas com o almoço. Não porque as pessoas antes almoçavam de forma com regras de não compliance, é que as pessoas começaram a pensar efetivamente se fazia sentido marcar um almoço com alguma pessoa e teriam que apresentar isso para alguém. Então as pessoas resolveram almoçar menos, e isso não significou que a área de vendas teve uma performance menor. Quer dizer que eles começaram a otimizar mais as despesas. Então acho que tem esse lado também do compliance, que a empresa acaba otimizando melhor os custos, uma vez que as pessoas têm que seguir regras e têm que pensar no que estão fazendo.
So as you move along and you try to duplicate efforts, try to reduce the duplication of efforts, reduce the duplication of controls, how do you suggest that companies should approach selecting a framework or frameworks to try to reduce this duplication of controls and efforts? And then the second part of the question is, how do you motivate the control owners to continue to provide the information that's required to do the measurement and comply with regulations? Go ahead, Scott.
So finding the right platform is a challenge in itself, but there are some guiding principles that can help most organizations. One is being aware of what the provider can give you in terms of the content, in terms of the coverage, not just for regulations. You want to know that the provider provides content about regulations that will guide your compliance efforts, but you also want to know that they'll provide information on how best to do that, what recommended practices are that can be applied generally to any compliance requirement that may affect you. You also want to make sure they have expertise in the areas of highest concern to your business. In terms of integration with IT, one of the things I think businesses tend to lose sight of a lot of times is how directly dependent the business is on IT, and how directly linked to the business IT is. There seems to be this separation, or sense of separation, in what the business does versus what IT does. IT exists to help the business, to enable the business to succeed. The business uses IT in order to grow and be successful and be profitable. So integration with IT controls and IT resources, business management systems, ERP, HR, financial management systems, may be just as important to the financial business as to any business would be the integration with recommended security controls, for example. So having the ability to reach across those is important to a business, being very key. In terms of engaging stakeholders and people involved in risk management processes, compliance will only get you so far. You know you have to comply, and if you're a compliance officer or security or risk officer responsible for compliance, you may be able to wave the big stick at your people and say, well, this has to be done. But the two things that are most important in terms of actual success are, first of all, what kind of support from senior management do efforts get? And is that support just punishment, or is it also incentive? Is there incentive for people to cooperate with risk management that helps the business? And that's the second most important part. Does what we're doing here actually help the business? So one of the trends that we've seen in the last few years at EMA is emphasis on things like IT service management. For those of you who are familiar with ITIL, the IT Infrastructure Library, and the principles of how IT can better and more consistently serve the business, how that can help IT perform better, how things like quality management affect IT and affect the delivery of more reliable, higher quality IT services, These are things that can help. Anything that helps a stakeholder see how they will benefit from participation is likely to help. It's not uniform. Sometimes, I mean, the reason we have compliance in the first place is for enforcement. But it's not just punishment. It can be incentive as well in terms of how your business or your aspect of the business can do better.
I think you hit on a lot of good points. In terms of picking a framework, I think the solution partner is important too. I mean, clearly you have to have a partner who understands risk, understands your business, and has a control framework that aligns with whatever controls you're obviously are related to your business. That's one piece of it, but also I think we're still in a maturity, very early maturity phase in terms of GRC and the tools, and we would certainly like to see better integration between IT GRC and eGRC, and we think we're seeing that. And it still will take time. The gap does exist, and I think part of it is due to just the number of controls and the number of moving parts in an IT framework versus the various business frameworks that you have and the various compliance and controls and risk management objectives in the business side. So bringing those worlds together, and I think one of the things that we've been trying to do at Synovus is to establish a common taxonomy, and I've heard it referred to a couple times already, but demonstrating the value of that to the business is a little bit of an uphill battle because it's a little ambiguous. But if you can get a common framework around your products, around your business processes, even your organization, depending on the complexity of your organization, and then ultimately your controls and your risks, and then that way legal and audit and compliance and IT security and operational risk and enterprise risk and all these different areas of risk management that really have a lot of the same responsibilities in terms of reporting to the same constituency, whether it's the audit committee or whether it's your board or whether it's an external regulator, an auditor, and you can begin to convey the value of a common taxonomy and a common framework for communicating risk. We did a survey about a year ago, and this was really more focused around information risk and IT risk. But we asked the heads of different lines of business and the heads of the organization, what was the most valuable service that we provided to them? And it was things like keeping an eye on the regulatory forefront, mitigating risks, remediating, responding to incidents, all of these typical day-to-day things that you see IT service providers and internal IT staff providing. But the number one thing that came back in that survey was risk communication. And I think that I stepped back from that and realized that, a big part of what our job is breaking down the silos within the organization and helping the organization understand risk. What is their risk appetite, and how do we want to address that? And I think that also speaks to the second part of your question in terms of how do you get the business on board. It needs to be a top-down approach, but it also gets back to the relationships and helping each constituent understand the value of risk management and what a GRC platform can bring.
Eu sou pouco ainda não pessimista, mas eu vejo um espaço muito grande ainda para ser ultrapassado entre a visão do board, né, dos conselheiros, e o mundo efetivo do compliance, gestão de riscos. O que a gente vê no movimento da governança corporativa é que ainda se discute muito, né, quais são as melhores práticas de governança, como uma empresa deve ser bem governada, né, e um dos pilares disso, né, é a questão da gestão de riscos, né, a questão da ética. Isso já é uma discussão que faz parte da discussão da governança corporativa. Mas se vê pouco ainda em como uma empresa pode efetivamente no dia a dia ser ética, estar em compliance. Então, um exemplo apenas, pegar o código do IBGC, quem não conhece, o Instituto Brasileiro de Governança Corporativa, que é um instituto fundado no final da década de 90, dedicado efetivamente à área de governança. Hoje tem uma liderança na América Latina, com certeza fez muito pelo desenvolvimento da governança no Brasil, mas quando você pega o código de melhores práticas do IBGC, o que isso recomenda em relação à ética? que a empresa tem um código de ética. Mas é muito pouco. Uma empresa ter meramente um código de ética, que pode estar numa gaveta do funcionário, que sequer é lido. Como é que uma empresa... Será que é suficiente uma empresa ser ética ter um código de ética? Quer dizer, como é que... Esse é o desafio. Como é que se avança no tema para que a empresa não seja apenas ética nos livros, né, books, mas também viver eticamente. Aí o papel fundamental de um diálogo entre o IT e os membros da administração, para que se construam soluções que a ética não seja apenas uma filosofia da empresa. Eu acho que as empresas alemãs pecaram um pouco por isso. Elas imaginavam, olha, eu, por natureza, por visão de mundo, eu sou ético. Eu tenho como filosofia de fazer negócio ser ético. Ah, tá bom, e aí? O que aconteceu? Várias empresas alemãs estiveram envolvidas recentemente em escândalos, fraudes, por quê? Eles perceberam que não bastava na filosofia de negócio ser ético. Se na prática, no dia a dia, você não tem um sistema efetivo que faça com que a empresa não só controle para ver se ela está sendo ética, mas isso eu acho que é o novo desafio do próprio IT. Compliance não é só controle, mas é também, acima de tudo, criação de cultura, né? Ou seja, a empresa tem que viver o compliance não só com medo de ser pego, né? Mas que a empresa efetivamente absorva os princípios como parte da sua cultura. Aí é o desafio de ferramentas de IT, não sei se e-learning, assim por diante, para criar uma cultura de compliance na empresa e não apenas uma cultura de controle.
I agree with that, but I think it's very difficult at the same time. Look at Google, and Google's corporate philosophy is do no harm, do no evil, whichever it is. At the same time, this is a company that has access to probably more information than any other single organization outside of government in the world. And we've seen some recent comments from the company's CEO, Eric Schmidt, about what can be done with that information. That if you could find, I think it's 14 photographs or pieces of information about an individual, Google can tell you where that individual is going, what they're going to be doing. Just a wide range of things that can be learned from just the sheer volume of information. The challenge is not just having, a code of ethics, but practicing it. And what we talk about in the GRC world about tone at the top, that really has to not only be set, but carried out in day-to-day practice. Now, an organization like Google that has that philosophy still has real challenges when it comes to working that out in practice. They may have to respond to government inquiries for information. They have the innate capability that's growing every day to learn these things that could directly affect the risk of individuals and companies. How do businesses handle those kind of challenges, particularly when they have an opportunity to make money and to grow markets and create new markets by capitalizing on that ability? Really, really difficult, particularly in an environment today where we see that it's so difficult for organizations to adhere to their code of ethics, given the challenges that they face and the fact that less ethical competitors may actually capitalize on an organization's reluctance or ability to act on their best code of ethics. So how do we get this across an industry? That's a very, very difficult challenge and a different kind of challenge from what we face in operations day to day, I think.
Okay. The next couple questions, then we'll open it up for outside questions, is you talked a lot about maturing the process, distilling the information down. If there were 2 or 3 pieces of information, which pieces of information would you say you want to communicate to different stakeholders? And what method do you think would be the most effective? Sending it via email, holding a meeting, etc.?
A questão do stakeholder, ela traz um novo desafio, porque hoje a empresa não é apenas responsável pelas suas condutas, mas também por condutas de stakeholders. Hoje, se você, os fornecedores da empresa, às vezes você tem por exemplo, uma montadora de veículos, né? Se um dos fornecedores dela, que fabrica um produto que tem a marca da montadora, estiver envolvido em qualquer tipo de escândalo, a imagem da própria montadora pode também estar afetada. Então hoje ela precisa se relacionar com os seus stakeholders, não só para prestar contas dos seus atos, né? Isso é a visão mais tradicional, a empresa precisa prestar conta dos seus atos para a comunidade, para os consumidores, fornecedores, mas ela também precisa controlar a conduta dos stakeholders. Então, por exemplo, um banco, né? O banco hoje, ele precisa não apenas se comunicar com seus stakeholders, com a comunidade, com o cliente, mas ele precisa também, na hora de conceder um crédito para o seu cliente, verificar se o seu cliente não está envolvido em algum tipo de problema, por exemplo, ambiental, né? Ou seja, imagina um banco, isso já aconteceu no passado, bancos estrangeiros no Brasil, que sem tomar o cuidado na análise do crédito para quem está fornecendo recursos, para o seu cliente, né? Ele financia, por exemplo, um trator para uma madeireira que vai derrubar a árvore de uma floresta nativa. O nome do banco vai estar envolvido porque o seu cliente está envolvido em algo equivocado. Então, hoje, o stakeholder, o relacionamento com o stakeholder, ele é fundamental também para a questão do compliance. Aí gera uma situação, assim, aí entra a questão dos riscos. Como é que uma empresa vai conseguir fazer o compliance interno e o compliance entre os seus stakeholders? Então ela tem que entrar, aí entra a questão do gerenciamento de risco para saber efetivamente aonde estão os riscos, os maiores riscos de relacionamento com os stakeholders, para poder então fazer a gestão do compliance desse tipo de stakeholder. Mas aí o desafio maior é quais são as soluções de IT para isso, né? Ou seja, se a empresa precisa se comunicar com todos os stakeholders, precisa verificar se eles estão em compliance, os stakeholders, com as normas. Como é que ela faz isso? Aí é fundamental, indispensável uma solução de IT, porque sem ela a única solução capaz de um maior alcance, né? Ter uma comunicação e controle dos stakeholders. Eu vou deixar a solução de IT, eu vou deixar para os especialistas aqui em IT.
So, real briefly, in answer to your question as far as the preferred way to communicate, yes, all of them. Anything that you can use to improve communication between people who own risk, who are making risk management decisions, those who are affected by them, and any aspect of stakeholders, use everything you can. I think a lot of people get into security believing that it's going to be a great technical challenge, which it is. In fact, computing really, in a sense, was born out of security, code making, code breaking codes. What I think a lot of practitioners come to find is that the best tools that they can bring to their job are people tools, building consensus, communicating with people throughout the business, getting issues across, and using everything that you can to communicate effectively in terms of risk decisions and people affected by risks. So email, to the extent that social media can do that without exposing too much risk, that's a big challenge that organizations face today. Conventional ways of communicating, anything that will be helpful, items in the news, what have you. And one of the things that I've done in the past is try and set up a communications resource or center for getting risk information out, so that we're not going to stakeholders every time and saying, well, this is what the risks are if we seize this opportunity, looking at that in every way, but just keeping that information flowing on a regular basis so they're familiar on a day-to-day basis with what those issues are and their impact as much as we can.
I think the technology and the pace and change of technology is actually, it's contributing more to the threat than it is the solution in terms of what we've seen. It's, you need to use every method. I mean, face-to-face is obviously the best, but it doesn't quite scale. So we look to try and leverage every measure that we can. But some of the tools that involve workflow and that they help with the nag factor. I mean, there's a component to compliance that you have to, keep sometimes reminding people that they need to do this or check this. So the tools can help with that. But at the end of the day, you really need to have that relationship with the business constituent and help them understand what they're doing and leverage the technology to try and facilitate the more mundane things, the less value-add things, and use that time wisely to make sure that you're creating awareness and creating value in the proper light.
Okay. I think that could be one of the most important questions is every organization already has technology in place. They have processes, they've already have several point products that do vulnerability management, they do several different functions. How do you justify to upper management to say, okay, I want to introduce a new process, I want to bring new technology in, what's the rationale what selling points would you use to do that?
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of things, Jeff. One, I think we've talked about a few times just the number of controls. So, I mean, if you were to, I mean, you very quickly could show a manager, we've got thousands of controls that we have to comply with. Do you have a good understanding of how well we're doing there? None of the tool sets that we have, maybe, for example, would have that. So if you show a GRC, to them, you can quickly demonstrate the value of rationalization of controls and how that can bring value. But I think you need to start with the end in mind and understand what the top executives want to understand. It gets back to defining the risk, appetite, but what kind of dashboards do you want to see? What kind of reports do you want to see? What kind of key metrics do you want to see? And there's a little bit of an iterative process there that goes along, but if you start with the end in mind, you can typically work back and understand where the technology can help you, realize those benefits. But that's what we've seen. Yeah.
Would you try to tie dollars and cents to it?
I would like to. I have struggled with that a bit, I'll tell you. I think you can start to look at the cost of compliance. There's certainly some hard costs there with whether you're bringing in an external auditor or whether there's a certain degree with the banking regulators or PCI compliance or any of those. There's some hard costs to that. But I think the greater costs are more the intangibles, the soft costs of people. Repeatedly testing and validating and remediating controls.
And do you believe that upper management, when you articulate it in a non-dollars and cents perspective, do they understand that, and do they allow you to move forward just based on more of a higher level understanding of what the risk is?
I think so in varying degrees. Being in a highly regulated industry certainly helps with that. Other industries may have different challenges. Obviously, the culture plays a role in that. But I mean, certainly in our organization, I think our management gets it. The value of risk.
Dollars and cents certainly is the best way, if you can, and make a convincing argument for it. Moreover, that's always difficult. But there are some things beyond dollars and cents that do help. And in terms of IT risk management, one of the things that we see repeatedly at EMA is the fact that a lot of organizations do vulnerability assessment, and those controls do often integrate with a GRC platform. Vulnerability remediation, fixing vulnerabilities, on the other hand, that's where things can fall down quite often, because the security team is responsible for vulnerability assessment. The security team is not typically responsible for fixing or remediating vulnerabilities. One of the things that drives CIOs crazy about security management, in our experience, is the fact that these processes often don't work well together. So getting these processes to work better together across different groups, security and IT operations, can improve the performance of IT operations in terms of fixing risk, and there are ways to measure that. Patch latency, for example, how long does it take on average to apply patches to critical vulnerabilities? You can shorten those windows and get a better response from both security and IT operations and help them work better together. That's one thing that can make a CIO very happy, and in turn can make senior executives very happy if it reduces the total cost of IT operations. And just a side benefit of that is that you tend to get more reliable IT, or IT that has less variability and a better quality of IT. So these are things that do help in terms of IT risk management in making the case for a platform that helps processes work better together across different groups.
eu ainda acho que o argumento mais forte, e como eu vejo como funcionou isso em outros países, é o risco do administrador pessoalmente responder com seus bens pessoais, inclusive com sanções criminais, caso ele não comprove que tenha sido, antes do acontecimento da fraude, que ele tenha sido diligente na implementação das ferramentas para evitar que aquilo acontecesse. Aí o IT é uma das principais ferramentas para evitar, ou pelo menos, caso aconteça, para o administrador mostrar, olha, eu fui diligente, eu busquei ferramentas de IT para, de alguma forma, evitar o no compliance, mas efetivamente eu não consegui evitar e aconteceu. Então, a legislação brasileira já está avançando nesse ponto. A legislação antitrust, por exemplo, se a empresa comprovar que ela tinha um programa de compliance efetivo e ela esteja envolvida em algum tipo de problema de concorrencial, a pena da empresa e do administrador é reduzida se ele comprovar que ele foi diligente. Então, eu acho que ainda o administrador vai ter que aprender pela dor. Então, como estão surgindo no Brasil alguns casos já, muitos casos, na área trabalhista é muito comum o administrador ter seus bens bloqueados, mas estão surgindo outros casos recentes de processos, não só na nossa SEC, na CVM, né, contra administrador, que inabilitando o administrador para exercer sua profissão de administrador, mas também estão começando a surgir os primeiros processos criminais contra administradores por crimes como, por exemplo, insider information, assim por diante. Então, hoje o administrador, ele precisa buscar as melhores ferramentas para evitar, caso a empresa esteja envolvida em algum tipo de problema, ele pessoalmente não seja obrigado a responder aí por algum desvio ético, assim por diante.
I think what we'll do now is let's open it up to questions. So you can, there are two perspectives here. So we have a couple of practitioners, people that are actually implementing the technology, and we have Scott, who's actually advising on best practices and what you should look for. So here's a great opportunity to ask these guys to kind of measure up what you're doing and find out what they're suggesting, some of the things they're doing. So why don't we, any questions? Go ahead. Here, let's bring the microphone to you.
Na minha impressão que a gestão de riscos em TI fica restrita à área de riscos operacionais, fraude, controle de acesso. De que maneira a equipe de TI pode participar e colaborar na questão de gestão de riscos estratégicos? Não seria necessário ela participar do desenvolvimento desses objetivos estratégicos, no momento do nascedouro desses objetivos?
And not just in operations, but in terms of strategically valuable data for making critical business decisions.
Yeah, I would add to that. Governance does play a big role in how you organize your governance within the organization. Is probably a good way to get involved. Certainly a lot of the types of risk that we deal with certainly spill. I think you've mentioned as well, spill into reputational risk, and that's probably a good link into other areas of strategic and other areas of risk management within the organization.
Na empresa, o órgão responsável, na teoria da governança, para discutir as questões estratégicas é o Conselho de Administração, né, o Board of Directors. Então, o que eu aconselho é que o responsável pela área de IT se aproxime do Board of Directors, não só do ponto de vista pessoal, mas também é importante que dentro das reuniões do Board of Directors tenha uma reunião específica para discussão de IT. É nesse momento em que a estratégia da empresa é discutida e em que o IT vai se envolver na estratégia. Ou seja, ou você tem, as empresas mais avançadas teriam entre os membros do Board of Directors alguém da área de IT, ou com especialidade de IT, ou que ao menos se tivesse um momento ao longo do ano para que o IT conversasse com o Board of Directors, ou ao menos tivesse um comitê, né, como existe já pela legislação americana a obrigação de um comitê de auditoria, por que não ter também uma relação formal, um comitê de IT, algo ligado ao Conselho de Administração? Essa é a instância responsável para discutir estratégia, onde eu vejo um momento para que o IT também se envolva na estratégia da empresa, e daí a partir daí, né, volta para a execução e executa, mas é nesse momento da aproximação com o Board of Directors que eu vejo o caminho para o IT deixar de ser meramente operacional e também ser estratégico.
João Carlos Horas, e eu respondo pela Diretoria de Gestão de Riscos, Oi Telecomunicações. Pensando em governança e principalmente da importância de TI no respeito à qualidade, transparência de informações, eu gostaria de ouvir a opinião de vocês com relação a como integrar a visão de riscos que existe hoje no presidente da companhia, no Conselho Fiscal e no Conselho de Administração. Como vocês enxergam o desafio dessa integração?
Eu vejo o momento inicial seria a discussão de uma política de IT, né, pelo Conselho de Administração. O Conselho de Administração é o órgão que define as estratégias da empresa e ele deveria estar envolvido na elaboração de uma política para o IT, onde estabeleça quais são as prioridades, como vincular o IT com o TI, com a parte estratégica da empresa. Então, eu vejo um profissional de TI que não está no Conselho de Administração, pensando numa política de IT com objetivos estratégicos e apresentando essa política ao Conselho de Administração para ele analisar se a política, e ele vai definir essa política a partir da proposta da área de TI, aprovar a política, aí entra o papel do presidente para fazer com que aquela política se transforme em atos concretos, né, que é a execução dessa política, e daí o papel do Conselho Fiscal. O Conselho Fiscal no Brasil tem um papel mais de fiscalização financeira, né, então o papel dele seria nessa política mais de fiscalização financeira, né. Então eu vejo esse o caminho, né, o profissional do IT, dependendo da posição que ele ocupa na organização, tem organizações que ele tem uma posição de diretor até no estatuto social da empresa, né, com responsabilidade. Tem organizações, geralmente, que ele está na estrutura, mas ele tem que caminhar na estrutura da organização e lutar por uma política de IT que seja apresentada ao Conselho de Administração, para o Conselho aprovar a política e depois voltar para ele para executar a política. Esse eu vejo o caminho.
So when you're talking about financial risk and business risk as part of overall risk, I think it's important to have a risk organization that communicates regularly amongst themselves, that can develop a consensus in a way that can be presented to senior management and the board in a credible way. And we've seen examples of this where this has worked and failed in the last few years. With the mortgage crisis, one of the things that investment bankers did was develop a way to bundle individual personal mortgages together and turn them into an investment instrument. That investment instrument, the performance of it was based on the assumption that real estate values would always go up, that they would never go down. So there was a failure in assessing the risk that property values would actually decline. That was a failure with the dot-com bust in the late 90s, and for that matter, was a failure in the 1920s with the global depression in the 1930s. So having a risk organization that, first of all, takes that comprehensive view and can articulate that, can say that in a way that's meaningful to senior management and the board as one voice is really important. But there has to be the ability to listen from the point of the board and executive managers. What's the cost for investment banks or for consumer banks in the last few years if they didn't participate in these lending instruments that bundle personal mortgages? They'd be left behind in their competition. No one, or very few, I should say, organizations were willing to make the decision that this is too risky and we can't afford it. But the ones that did are still doing okay today. They're thriving today, and they're acquiring competitors that failed because they failed at risk management. So the lessons learned from actual experience have to be believed by senior managers and executives. In IT, we're starting to see this now around awareness of data breach investigation reports and actual incidents where data was lost and the impact it had on the business. That's credible to senior management. The ability to have a group that can speak together with one voice in a way that's credible to senior leadership in that way, I think really makes a difference.
Yeah, we call that a black swan. So, you know, and I think we're seeing more and more of those, you know, types of impacts that we see that are unprecedented, that we've never seen before. And, you know, clearly in the U.S., the audit committee, which is kind of derived out of SOX, is really around financial risk, but it's evolving. And you know, particularly in our organization, you know, we're looking at creating a risk committee that's more dedicated to other types of risk outside of just ensuring the integrity of financial statements. But there's so much change. There's so many dynamics to this aspect. You know, the culture is obviously a big part of it. But we just look at the pace. I think for me, it's the pace of change and you know, how rapidly we're able to respond. And I think that's why, at least in the U.S., the regulatory community is looking for financial institutions to be more proactive and less reactive. And we're seeing that in a lot of areas of risk management. You know, are your risk assessments forward-looking? You know, it's one thing to assess and evaluate the effectiveness of controls, the effectiveness of your compliance posture, but it's a whole other thing to look out there at the things that haven't happened before, that could happen. In operational risk, you look at scenario analysis, you look at, you understand the business process, and you do hypotheticals, you do what-if scenarios, and you say, you know, what if this catastrophic event occurred, or what if this external event occurred? And there are a lot of possibilities there, but what's important is that you're thinking through that, you're having that dialogue, and you're getting people to think about those types of issues.
Okay. Well, we're out of time. Thank you very much for joining us today, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.